Hello, I'm Lucy from Bookshanks and I'm here today to give you my first 2 reviews from the Women's Prize longlist. Hello, welcome back to our channel. I'm here with the first 2 book reviews from the Women's Prize longlist. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that this video is a little bit later than billed, and that is because unfortunately the flu came and landed in our house with a vengeance in the last couple of weeks. So frankly, it's been thoroughly miserable, but I just wanted to say a really quick thank you to all the people who sent us really lovely messages to check that we weren't in fact dead. That cheered us up lots and lots. I'm also sorry to anyone who has subscribed to our channel on the basis of my dulcet, soothing tones, because usually actually I'm a lot more shrill. What can you do? Anyway, I will try not to cough my way through this video. So let me tell you about the books that I have read. The first of which was Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. Now this is a book quite unlike anything I have ever read before. I know we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, most boring cover in the history of the world, and totally not reflective of the astonishing originality which is between those covers. This is the story of Ada. I'm going to call her Ada, although I've seen her called in other places Ada as well. So I'm not entirely sure how to say it, but for the purpose of this, it's ADA. I'm going to call her Ada. And she is a Nigerian girl who was born as the answer to her Catholic father's prayers. But she has been born sort of endowed with spirits. She's got sort of different parts, children of gods living inside her. And as she grows up and she moves forward in life, they sort of pull at her, they vie for control of her, and they live sort of relatively dormantly when she's a child, but a traumatic incident when she's at college awakens them and sort of lets them loose to really exercise their enormous control over her life and the direction in which she moves. It's basically a coming of age story, really, about whether Ada, or the Ada, as the spirits inside her refer to her, is able to overcome sort of her tormentors and these different forces that pull at her, or whether in fact they're going to lead her to self-destruct. What it is that is just astonishingly original about this novel, though, from my perspective, is the way in which it's told. And that's actually not at all really through Ada's perspective. There's a tiny bit through her perspective, but mostly it's actually through the perspectives of the different spirits that inhabit her, and also collectively at times through the viewpoints of those that inhabit her as well. So it's a we viewpoint, which is just fabulously executed and yet just intensely original, really surreal at the same time. And because we're in these different first person narratives or collective narratives, really intense as well, you are so tightly focused in on these viewpoints that they are really incredibly smothering, I guess, as well as surreal, incredibly passionate, incredibly intense, and to me, the absolute strength of this novel. And I think actually to have all those different viewpoints and this collective viewpoint, and not actually the viewpoint of sort of the subject of the novel, and then make it all coherent, is a really remarkable achievement. I think, you know, a lesser writer would have found themselves spectacularly undone by having such enormous ambition. And I love that ambition. I love that this novel exists and pushes the boundaries, I guess, of what it is that we usually read, and the way in which we usually read, and the viewpoints from which we usually read. I really loved that. That said, there were plenty of things that I didn't love about this novel too. And actually, the prose was one of them, because at times it was intensely profound and fantastically insightful and really beautiful and eloquent, and just, you just go, oh my goodness, and you read the passages again and you go, just wow, the insight to put all of that emotion into such original language was really impressive. And then at other times I found it did tip over into a little bit kind of pretentiousness, overcooking the same points, and also sometimes just a little bit plain baffling. There were sentences and there were similes where I read them over and over again, and I just couldn't make them make sense, unfortunately. So for me, the prose itself was kind of hit and miss. The subject matter of the novel, how did I feel about that? Mixed feelings, I guess. So Ada is grappling with her very literal demons for control of her identity, really, and control of the direction of her life, and just trying, it's a survival story, I guess, really, trying to survive. And amidst this, in the course of this, battle for survival and self-control, the novel takes in some really heavy issues. So we've got self-harm and suicide, rape, eating disorders, some really heavy subject matters, and potentially big trigger points for people. And I don't have any issue reading about those subject matters. Actually, I find them quite compelling, and I like to read about books that examine the darker side of life. However, I did feel that at times in this book they were almost romanticized a little bit. The way in which they were discussed through the perspective of the spirits made me a little bit uncomfortable, because I thought that they were perhaps being romanticized rather than I don't know, I was going to say treated with the respect that they deserve, but that's not what I mean. And actually, I think we should be able to discuss the big issues with nuance, and I guess it's because we're doing it from the perspectives of these spirits, and they're really self-indulgent spirits, that the writing is naturally going to go to a sort of self-indulgent leanings. But for me, I didn't always appreciate the way in which the big subjects were tackled. So overall, I think that this is going to be a novel that really divides people. I was going to say it's going to be a novel you'll love or you'll hate, but actually it's not, because that's not how I feel about it at all. I feel really conflicted, because actually I didn't really enjoy this book, but I have thought about it quite a lot since I finished it, and despite the fact I didn't really like it very much, I'm glad that it exists. And I'm glad that it's getting recognition and publicity purely for its originality and its ambition, and just how it challenges, I guess, sort of the typical structures of narratives. And I would like to read more books like this, which sounds really weird to say. I'd like to read more books that I don't really like, but I guess it's just about having variety out there and about having really intelligent discussions about big issues from different perspectives. So I guess for me, that was the real strength of this book. You're just gonna have to read it and work out whether you like it or not. I don't know, there's nothing else I can say about that book. So that was Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. Next up, I'm going to talk to you about Remembered by Yvonne Battle-Felton. And I feel like I should kind of do a disclaimer on this one before I start, because if you read the jacket of this book, it is absolutely the kind of book that I was set up to love. It is totally my kind of read. So it would have had to do something really quite poor for me to not at least be on side to start with. But I'm just so happy to say it totally delivered. I absolutely loved this book. I loved this book. It was so great. So it is set to start with in 1910 in Philadelphia. where a black man has driven a streetcar into a shop. He has purposefully, we think, driven this streetcar into the shop and caused lots of injuries. He is now in the hospital, clinging to life. His mother is at his bedside, willing him, to make it through the night. And there is a baying mob on the street outside the window at the hospital. So that is how the novel is set up. We then cast back in time to about 1840, it is basically. And through the mother's eyes, through Edward's mother's eyes, we are told the story of her family. So her and her sister, and also the generation before her, and how they were slaves in the South in America during the Civil War, and basically the family's journey that leads them to this point with Edward on what may or may not be his deathbed for a crime he may or may not have purposely committed. And this book, as well as being, sort of a historical novel all about the slave trade and the Civil War, and actually really brilliantly, emancipation and the long tail legacy of what happens after the slave trade ends, which was just done, oh God, so fantastically. And I always think aftermaths are really interesting and kind of neglected in fiction, aren't they? We always sort of go for the big moments in history, but actually it's those aftermaths and it's that long tail legacy that has such incredibly rich stories and emotion running through it. I've got completely sidetracked. I don't know what I was talking about. That bit was really good. Oh yeah, so other than this historical element that's running through it so brilliantly, this is a story about family and what it means to be a family, what constitutes a family, and specifically what constitutes motherhood, really, and what lengths people will go to in the name of love. So Spring is Edward's mother in this story, and she was a twin. She is haunted by her deceased twin sister. So a lot of the novel is in conversation backwards and forwards between them, and that reveals this story of their past. And the relationship between those two women is incredibly powerful, and actually between all the different characters in the novel. And it is so powerful because the way that Yvonne Battle-Felton writes these people is so imperfect. They are so flawed. They're so full of imperfections, and they're so full of human emotions which drive their actions in ways that are not necessarily rational, that you just feel they're so utterly believable. And their motivations and their their aims in life are at one time completely aligned and yet also completely conflicted, and it's the choices that they have to make along the way that are just so visceral. You really feel how raw the emotion is in every choice that they have to make. And particularly for me, the bits that I found most impactful were when the sort of conflicts came between what it meant to be family and what it meant to be a mother, and how we realise love, I guess, really. Because there are parts of this book where things are done in the name of love, in the genuine name of love, with the very best intentions, but at the same time are utterly brutal. And yet you think, my goodness, if I were in that situation, what is it that I would do? I just found this book on every level fabulously executed and incredibly painfully emotional. It's a really brilliant read. The writing too is bang on. I think, you know, there were wonderful similes running through there. I think someone had a laugh like piano scales, just things that lifted the people off the page, which I really, really enjoyed. If I had one complaint, it's a small one really. There is one character called Ella who I found absolutely fascinating, and quite early on in the novel you are really sort of drawn to her, and then her narrative cuts very abruptly, and I would have liked to have seen, I guess, what it was that happened that led to what it was that happened, if you get me. And we didn't really get that. We sort of got, you know, a passing comment, and I felt like, oh no, I wanted to know more. But I kind of think, in a way, it's not a criticism, you know. You need to be left, to a degree, wanting more. And all these things are just a very fine balancing act, aren't they? I'm trying to think if I had anything else worth saying about it. I might just, you know, squeal that I loved it. I don't know if it's been a bigger novel in America or other countries than it has in the UK, because it's not a book that I'd heard of before the Women's Prize. It's not an author that I've heard of. This is a debut. And it's not one that I've seen, you know, around with great big fanfare, but it's one that I really, really hope gains a much, much wider audience than it's had so far as a result of this prize. And isn't that the best thing about these prizes? That's when prizes for me are totally worthwhile, when they take you to authors and new voices outside what it is that you know, we're getting bombarded with all the time. Love that. So that's a good point too. That is my feelings on Freshwater and Remembered. One I absolutely loved, one that was a good book but probably just not for me. If you have read either of these novels, I would love to know your thoughts. So please do talk to me in the comments below. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely week, and we'll be back soon. Bye.